anybody out there.
Warning. This video gets into sensitive topics. Warning. This video gets into sensitive topics such as depression, war, and drugs and alcohol abuse. If you are sensitive to that or are too young, I can only suggest you click off now. If not, then on with the video. Before we start the main topic, a few clarifications. First off, I'm not analyzing every single song. Multiple people have done that, and I've done it much better than I ever could. Another thing is that we're gonna look at the story in timeline order, everything from Pink's father going into war to the two sons in the sunset. And some of you might say, if you want the full story of The Wall, just watch the movie. But the movie takes some stuff out and doesn't have a continuation that's shown in the final cut. So enough talk, let's start the video. The story starts with the birth of our main character Pink and his father, J.A. Pinkerton. Yes, that's seriously his name. Gets drafted into World War II, leaving his son to grow up without him. Another character we're looking at is the teacher, or schoolmaster as some call him, who also gets drafted into the war. As expected, Pinkerton is killed in battle. At the end of the war, the soldiers return, where Pink waits to see his father for the first time, but he never shows up. The teacher returns traumatized, back to his manipulating wife, who shows no remorse over the horrors her husband had witnessed. He then retires into a teacher who, because of his experiences of the war, abuses all of his students. Pink's mother then grows to be very overprotective of her son, now being a single mother after losing her husband in such a horrific way. Pink then goes to school, where he is humiliated by the schoolmaster in front of the other students. After one day at school, he finds out what his father had been up to during his absence, by looking through a drawer of old photographs hidden away, where he finds his father's uniform and a note sent to his mother of the apparent death. He now realizes this was the reason his father was missing through his childhood, and this deeply affects him, with the thoughts of the horrors Pinkerton had to witness keeping him up at night. And he even starts getting hallucinations of World War II, like of kids getting taken to the camps. This is where we get the first three of the bricks in the wall: the abuse of the teacher, the overprotective behavior of his mom, and the absence of his dad. From then on in the wall, the teacher only shows up as either flashbacks or hallucinations. But keep him in mind because he's, spoilers, the main focus in the sequel. Anyways, this is when Pink starts getting more messed up and when he starts growing young lust over the female students at his school, even spying on them through his window while smoking, at like 10 years old. Of course, his mother gets in the way and picks out his girlfriends for him, leaving him with one he doesn't like that much. He then ends up getting married to who we will call the wife because they never mention her name, and Pink leaves his overprotective mother behind. He then has a growing career of being a rock star, and he seems to be succeeding and making money off of that. So basically, everything seems to be going fine, until it's revealed that Pink's sexual lust hasn't gone away since he was a kid, where he cheats on his wife multiple times during his career. And this is a big reason why we're not fully sticking to the movie version, because in that, the wife leaves him because he's too hooked on his music career, and almost seems to be ignoring her, and she is the one who cheats first. Back to the original story. After the wife finds out about Pink's lust and how he focuses on his music more than her, she is heartbroken, and then leaves him and also cheats on him with someone else. After finding this out, Pink tries to redeem himself by trying to call her and sending flowers. However, as expected, she ignores him like how he ignored her. She then becomes another brick in the wall. Pink even starts to get haunted by her presence and his guilt, hallucinating his wife as this snake flower thing. I don't really know what it is, but it looks cool. I'm sorry, I just have to pause for a second. I love the animation in this movie, all designed by Gerald Scarfe. I know I talked about the stuff it gets wrong, but it's overall really interesting. Don't watch it with your parents though. It will. Not in real. Back to the story. Pink then joins a club led by a new character just known as the Manager, who is played by Bob Hoskins in the movie. Just thought that was worth mentioning.
Fuck me.
And he helps Pink improve his music career by giving him what every rock star used in the 80s, hardcore drugs. He then moves away to join this so-called music club and buys a hotel room where he hangs up all of his guitars and music equipment. This is where he starts to grow an addiction to the drugs and reflects back on his childhood memories, isolating himself from the rest of the world, questioning if he should build the wall. The music club then gets some hookers and Pink takes one to his apartment, not to have sex or anything, just to have around and feel something, anything other than sadness or isolation. The hooker tries to get his attention, but all Pink does is sit and stare at the TV, not acknowledging the woman or saying a word. Then after a few moments, he completely loses it and destroys everything in the hotel room, except for the TV or the hooker, because he has simply accepted that he has lost his mind, and he doesn't care anymore, and is now simply separated from reality. He says his farewells to the real world, gathers all of his traumas, and completes the wall. With the wall finally complete, and him fully isolated, he doesn't really feel anything, perhaps some regret. He starts to question whether or not he's in the right. He can't get help because he doesn't know if he needs it. And when he does try to reach out for someone, the wall is just too high. To make matters worse, he's not alone on the other side of the wall. He is surrounded by these things known as the worms, that are symbolic of the drugs and isolation eating his brain. At the other side of the wall, with only the worms on a TV, he sits and starts to reflect back on his childhood and traumas he faced, which is where the album begins. After he gets to the point where he is now, he overdoses and dies, both for real and symbolically. The manager and his crew revive him by using what else? More drugs. And the feeling of these drugs reminds Pink of another childhood memory where he had a fever, which brings us my favorite song of all time. I could make a full 10-minute video talking about that. But anyways, when Pink is brought back to life, he is reborn a new man. With this new face of his, he becomes a ruthless dictator and the leader of neo-Nazis called the Hammers. The Hammers then grow a following and support, and then they spread their hatred across the country, starting fights between officers, riots, and a lot of bloodshed. The Hammers then start to march around the streets, going from house to house, spreading their words and signature logos. And Dictator Pink starts to make speeches about the violence they will show. And you wouldn't understand that unless you put on subtitles. Then, the riots start to look strangely familiar to Pink. Oh god. The files, the explosions, the violence, the gunshots, the bloodshed, the shit stain! It's exactly like what his father had experienced on the battlegrounds. He had spent this time believing he had become better than the man he was before, without knowing he is now what he hated. He then abruptly stops the Hammers and locks himself in a restroom stall, where he sits alone yet again, with only himself, the worms, and the towering wall. Then he starts to judge himself for everything he has done, and everyone he hurt in the past. In his head, he imagines himself in a courtroom, being mocked in front of an audience by the bricks in the wall, like the teacher, the mother, and the wife. The judge, who is referred to as the worm, but he's also a giant ass, then sentences Pink to be exposed to his peers by tearing down the wall, which in reality is Pink wanting to forget all of this, break down the wall and see the real world again. This is another difference between the album and the movie. The album is infamous for its ending having, well, no end. The whole thing loops perfectly, with Pink asking, "Isn't this where we came in?" The movie doesn't end with the question, and is instead a full conclusion, with a full-on orchestra to accompany it. The ambitious ending of the album leads up to its sequel, The Final Cut, which is where we go to next. Half of a solo work by Roger Waters, and half Pink Floyd, it's debated whether or not The Final Cut is a continuation to The Wall. But given how most of the songs were originally for The Wall, and also given the original name of the album was Spare Bricks, I'll take it that the final cut is half of a continuation. The rest you can take as its own thing. Now this is where it gets a little confusing, and the short film doesn't really help, so I'm gonna try my best to summarize this. The story begins with the teacher as our main focus, most likely still in the school business. He returns home to his wife, who couldn't care less about him, as he just sits down to watch TV, where he witnesses the government's horrible state, which makes him reflect on the World War and the people he lost. The album shows us more of the teacher's human side, because in The Wall he was just another brick in the wall. Here, we see the man and the pain he had to go through. This is where it also reveals why he was so abusive. Being one of the few to return from the war, he took all of his rage out on his students. The teacher's memories of the battlefield connect to the spare bricks of the wall. The bricks here are the memories that, for Pink, aren't easy to get rid of. These memories being the ones of his father in World War II. Pink then decides to get therapy after dealing with his depression and suicidal thoughts for a while now, even though it's never mentioned how long this takes place after the war. But it's most likely been a while, and Pink is in the middle of rebuilding his life. Though it doesn't seem to be going the best, because Pink spends some of his time at the bar, drinking away behind paranoid eyes. At his therapist, he talks about the past of his father in the war, and how he is, similar to the teacher, is overwhelmed by the state of government, and how it hasn't changed and perhaps even getting a little worse. We cut back to the schoolmaster, who seems to be regretting his actions in the war and working for these horrible tyrants of the government, imagining himself in a memorial home with incurable tyrants and kings. And he shoots each one of them down, when in reality, he's just watching the TV in the living room. He then sits back and reads the newspaper. Pink then drives off into the sunset, driving away from the spare bricks left of the wall, with his fears of the Holocaust to come. He then goes off to write The Wall and The Final Cut, 2 studio albums. The Wall becomes a success, while The Final Cut, not so much, even though it should be just as successful as Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall. How dare you people? It's a great...
They disembarked in 45, and no one spoke, and no one smiled. There were too many spaces in the line. And gathered at the cenotaph, they all agreed with hand on heart to sheathe their sacrificial knives. But now she stands upon